I fell in love with my daughter's fiancé's father. At 66, when I thought romance and desire were closed chapters of my life, something happened that shattered every assumption I'd made about aging, about marriage, about myself. My name is Eleanor Wilson, and this is the story I never imagined I'd be telling. You know those moments that divide your life into before and after? For me, it wasn't the birth of my children, or my wedding day, or even the day I received tenure at Cornell. It was a stolen moment in the bathroom of the Wellington Hotel during my daughter Jessica's engagement party. A moment when Douglas Parker and I found ourselves alone and everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For 40 years, I'd been married to Richard. 40 years of shared tax returns, joint checking accounts, and Christmas cards signed the Wilsons. 4 decades of building what everyone called a successful marriage. We raised 2 accomplished children, maintained a lovely home in the suburbs of Boston, hosted dinner parties where guests commented on our obvious compatibility. We were the couple younger faculty members pointed to when discussing relationship goals. From the outside, we were perfect. The respected literature professor and the successful business executive. The couple who finished each other's sentences at department gatherings. The parents whose children both went to Ivy League schools. What no one saw, what I barely acknowledged myself, was how the substance of our marriage had slowly evaporated, leaving only the shell. Like one of those beautiful Victorian homes with an impeccable facade but crumbling foundations. Richard and I hadn't truly touched each other in years. I don't mean just physically, though that too had become rare and perfunctory. I mean that essential touch of souls, that recognition of another human being as more than just a familiar presence occupying the same space. We moved around each other with the choreographed precision of dancers who had rehearsed the same routine for so long they no longer needed to make eye contact. I had accepted this, more than accepted. I had convinced myself this was the natural evolution of a long marriage. The passionate love of youth giving way to companionable coexistence. Wasn't that what all the magazines said? What my mother had told me? Don't expect fireworks forever, Eleanor. Be grateful for stability. And I was grateful. I had a good life. A comfortable home in a tree-lined neighborhood. Financial security. Children who called regularly. Students who appreciated my insights into Jane Austen and Virginia Woolf. I had my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the library. At 66, I had constructed a life that fit me like a well-worn sweater. Not exciting, perhaps, but comfortable and familiar. Then came Jessica's engagement to Nathan Parker. Mom, his parents are coming up from New York next weekend. I thought we could all have dinner at that new place in Cambridge. To meet before the engagement party planning starts? Jessica's voice on the phone was bubbling with excitement. My sensible, cautious daughter, who analyzed everything from job offers to breakfast cereals, had fallen head over heels for a young engineer she'd met at a conference. Of course, sweetheart. I'll tell your father. Is it just his parents? Or siblings too? I was already mentally reviewing my wardrobe, thinking about what would be appropriate for a first meeting with my future in-laws. Just his dad, actually. His mom passed away about 5 years ago. Cancer. Her voice softened. He's been on his own since then. Nathan says he threw himself into his architecture work after she died. Oh, how awful, I said, meaning it. Poor man, poor man. That's what I thought. A widower who had lost his wife too young, someone deserving sympathy. I pictured someone broken by grief, perhaps socially awkward after years alone. Someone I would need to make feel comfortable and welcome into our family. I could not have been more wrong about Douglas Parker. The restaurant Jessica chose was one of those new farm-to-table places, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, with a menu that changed daily based on what was fresh at the farmer's market. Richard was running late, as usual. Some crisis at the office that couldn't possibly wait. I arrived alone, spotting Jessica and a young man who must be Nathan at a corner table. And there, standing as Jessica waved me over, was a tall man with silver hair and shoulders that still carried the suggestion of an athlete. He turned, and I saw eyes the color of stormy seas, crinkled at the corners from what I would soon learn was a ready laugh. Distinguished. That was the word that came to mind. Not handsome in the conventional sense. His nose was slightly too large, his jaw perhaps too sharp, but striking in a way that made it impossible not to look at him. "Mom, this is Nathan," Jessica said, beaming as the younger man stepped forward to shake my hand. "And this is his father, Douglas Parker." "Eleanor Wilson," I said, extending my hand to Douglas. "A pleasure to meet you." His hand enveloped mine, warm and solid. "The pleasure is entirely mine," he replied, his voice a rich baritone with just a hint of New York in the vowels. "I've heard so much about you from Nathan. A professor of English literature at Cornell, I understand? I just finished rereading Middlemarch last month." And just like that, we were off, discussing George Eliot and the complexities of provincial life while Jessica and Nathan exchanged amused glances. By the time Richard arrived, 20 minutes late and still checking his phone, Douglas and I had discovered a shared passion for 19th century novels, jazz music, and the paintings of Edward Hopper. "Sorry I'm late," Richard said, not sounding particularly sorry. He shook hands with Nathan and Douglas, ordered a scotch, and immediately turned the conversation to real estate values in Boston versus New York. I watched him from across the table, this man I'd been married to for 4 decades, and felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing a character in a play rather than my life partner. When had his voice become so monotonous to my ears? When had I stopped expecting him to ask about my day, my thoughts, my feelings? But more disturbing than these questions was the acute awareness I had of the man sitting beside me. The way Douglas leaned forward slightly when listening, the elegant movement of his hands as he spoke, the genuine interest in his eyes when he asked about my work. During a lull in the conversation, while Richard was explaining something about tax advantages to Nathan, Douglas leaned over and said quietly, "I noticed your reading glasses case has a quote from Mrs. Dalloway. She had the perpetual sense, as she watched the taxicabs, of being out, far out to sea and alone." I was startled, both that he had recognized the quote and that he had noticed such a small detail. "Yes, it was a gift from my graduate students when I received tenure. Appropriate for someone who teaches Virginia Woolf," he said. "Though I hope you're not as alone as Clarissa Dalloway." There was something in the way he said it, not flirtatious exactly, but attentive in a way I hadn't experienced in years, that sent a curious warmth through me. At 66, I felt a flutter in my stomach like a schoolgirl, and the sensation was so foreign, so unexpected, that I nearly laughed out loud. Instead, I took a sip of my wine and replied, "Well, I have my students and my books. They're excellent company, but not the same as a true meeting of minds, is it?" His eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary, and I felt something shift, like tectonic plates moving imperceptibly beneath the surface of the earth. The evening continued, pleasant and unremarkable on the surface. We made plans for the engagement party at the Wellington Hotel. We discussed potential wedding dates. We shared dessert, a chocolate torte that Douglas and I both agreed was a bit too sweet. I drove home with Richard in silence, his attention on the road, mine on the memory of Douglas's laugh when I'd made a wry observation about academic politics. It meant nothing, I told myself. Just the pleasure of meeting someone well-read and interesting, a welcome addition to family gatherings. But that night, lying beside Richard's gently snoring form, I found myself replaying every moment of the conversation with Douglas. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the respectful way he listened when I spoke. The unexpected thrill I felt when our hands accidentally touched, reaching for the breadbasket. "This is ridiculous," I whispered to myself in the darkness. "You're 66 years old, not 16. Yet as I finally drifted off to sleep, it was Douglas Parker's face I saw, not my husband's. And somewhere deep inside, in a place I thought had long gone dormant, something was awakening, something I wasn't prepared for at all. What began with a glance across a restaurant table would end in a way no one could have predicted, least of all me. Because 3 weeks later, at Jessica's engagement party, Douglas and I would find ourselves alone in a hotel bathroom, crossing a line I never imagined crossing. A line that would change everything. The morning after meeting Douglas, I woke before dawn with a strange restlessness. Richard slept soundly beside me, his back turned as usual. The space between us a silent testament to years of growing apart. I slipped out of bed without disturbing him and made my way downstairs to the kitchen of our colonial-style home in Brookline. Our house was beautiful by any standard. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a meticulously maintained garden that had been featured twice in the local garden tour. We'd purchased it 30 years ago when Richard received his first significant promotion. A house worthy of a rising executive, the realtor had called it. Over the years, I'd filled it with carefully selected antiques, original artwork from local artists, and shelves upon shelves of books. It was a professor's home, elegant without being showy, comfortable yet refined. As I made coffee in the quiet of early morning, I looked around at the familiar surroundings. The blue and white Portuguese tiles behind the sink that we'd brought back from a trip to Lisbon, the worn wooden table where our children had done their homework, the refrigerator door still adorned with Michael's Harvard Law School graduation announcement and Jessica's doctoral program acceptance letter. Evidence of a life well lived, a successful family. Why then did I feel this hollow ache in my chest? Richard and I had met at a faculty mixer when I was a young assistant professor and he was finishing his MBA. He was handsome, ambitious, and refreshingly direct in his interest. After years of dating earnest but impoverished graduate students, there was something appealing about his confidence, his certainty about the future. We married within a year, and I became pregnant with Michael shortly after. The early years were good, I reminded myself as I sipped my coffee. Richard's career took off, and although it meant long hours at the office and frequent business trips, I understood the sacrifices needed for success. I had my teaching, my research, my growing reputation in academic circles. When Jessica came along 3 years after Michael, our family felt complete. We had everything we'd planned for: healthy children, promising careers, financial stability. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when things began to change. Perhaps it was so gradual that, like a pot of water slowly heating, I didn't notice until everything was already boiling away. By the time the children were in high school, Richard and I were leading largely separate lives. He was consumed by his corporate world of mergers and acquisitions, board meetings and golf outings with clients. I had my students, my department politics, my publications. We still shared meals when our schedules aligned, attended the children's school events together, hosted holiday gatherings for extended family. But the connection, that essential current that runs between two people who truly see each other, had flickered and dimmed. The physical side of our marriage followed a similar trajectory. What had once been passionate, if somewhat conventional, became routine, then infrequent, then practically non-existent. I couldn't remember the last time Richard had touched me with real desire, or I him. We slept in the same bed out of habit, our bodies careful not to cross the invisible line down the middle of the mattress. I had accepted this erosion as the natural course of things. After all, many of my friends' marriages had followed similar paths. Caroline from the English department complained about her husband's snoring and how they now preferred separate bedrooms. Margaret from art history joked about retirement sex. Like retirement funds, you put a little away now for later, but you don't touch it until you're old. We laughed about these things, these compromises and accommodations, as if they were inevitable, even normal. I told myself that passion was for the young, that companionship and shared history were the compensations of a long marriage. And there were compensations. Richard was dependable. He never forgot our anniversary, though his gifts had become predictable. Jewelry from the same upscale store, selected with the help of the same salesperson year after year. He was generous with money, never questioning my purchases or academic travel expenses. He was proud of my professional achievements in his own distant way, mentioning my endowed chair to his colleagues as a point of prestige. "Your morning meditation?" Richard's voice interrupted my thoughts. He stood in the doorway in his monogrammed pajamas, hair still mussed from sleep but eyes already alert, checking his watch. a habit so ingrained I doubted he was even aware of it. "Just enjoying the quiet," I replied, pouring him a cup of coffee the way he preferred it. 1 sugar, splash of milk. "Did you sleep well?" "Fine, fine." He took the coffee, already reaching for his phone with his free hand. "Busy day ahead. I've got the quarterly review meeting, then lunch with the Simmons team. Might be late tonight." He didn't ask how I'd slept or what my day entailed. It didn't even occur to him to mention last night's dinner, to offer an opinion about Jessica's fiancé or his father. These omissions weren't cruel or intentional. They were simply the reality of how we now existed together, 2 people sharing space, but not truly sharing lives. "I'll be at the university most of the day," I said, though he hadn't asked. "Department meeting, then office hours, then I'm giving a guest lecture for the comparative literature seminar." He murmured, scrolling through emails. "Don't forget we have the Hendersons' anniversary party on Saturday." This was our marriage now, an exchange of schedules, a coordination of social obligations, occasional updates about the children, a smoothly functioning partnership that had all the appearance of intimacy without its substance. I watched him as he moved around the kitchen, efficient and self-contained. Richard, at 70, was still handsome in that corporate way. Silver hair always perfectly cut. His tall frame kept trim through rigorous sessions with a personal trainer, his clothing impeccable even in casual settings. He'd aged well externally, yet something essential had calcified within him over the decades, a gradual hardening that left him capable of managing multi-million-dollar deals, but seemingly unable to engage in genuine human connection. Had I changed too? I wondered, as I rinsed my coffee cup. The mirror told me I had aged predictably. My once auburn hair, now more gray than red despite discreet salon visits. Lines etched around my eyes and mouth. The softening of jawline and waistline that comes with advancing years. But inside, was I also hardened, diminished? The thought troubled me as I dressed for the day, selecting a navy skirt suit and pearl earrings, my professional armor. I found myself taking more care than usual with my makeup, adding a touch of blush, a hint of eyeshadow normally reserved for special occasions. "You're being ridiculous," I told my reflection. "This has nothing to do with meeting Douglas Parker." But even as I denied it, I knew something had shifted. That dinner conversation had awakened something I'd thought long dormant, not just physical attraction, though that was certainly part of it, but intellectual hunger, the pleasure of being seen and heard by someone who genuinely listened. The drive to campus that morning felt different somehow. I noticed things I usually didn't. The vibrant red of maple trees beginning their autumn transformation, the way sunlight played on the Charles River as I crossed the bridge, the energetic stride of students walking to morning classes. It was as if meeting Douglas had adjusted the lens through which I viewed the world, bringing everything into sharper focus. My office at the university was my sanctuary, walls lined with bookshelves, a desk positioned to catch the northern light, framed first editions of Virginia Woolf and Jane Austen, comfortable chairs for student conferences. Unlike our house, which bore the stamp of both Richard's and my tastes, or more accurately, the tasteful compromises between them, this space was entirely mine, reflecting my intellectual passions and professional identity. As I settled in, preparing for a day of teaching and meetings, my phone chimed with a text from Jessica. "Dad for rehearsal dinner at Wellington? Need final count for reservation." I replied affirmatively, then hesitated before asking, "Will Nathan's father be attending as well?" Her response came quickly. "Yes, Douglas is flying up from NY again. He's being super involved in all the planning, unlike Dad." I felt a flutter of something, anticipation, anxiety, at the thought of seeing Douglas again. "He seems very nice," I typed carefully, looking forward to getting to know him better as we plan the wedding. 3 innocent dots on the screen, 3 dots that concealed the entirely inappropriate direction of my thoughts. Jessica sent back a heart emoji. "He really liked you too, Mom. Said you were refreshingly erudite, whatever that means. Scholar speak, I guess. See you Thursday for venue tour." I set my phone down, trying to focus on the lecture notes before me, but my mind kept drifting. refreshingly erudite. He'd noticed me, thought about me after our meeting. The knowledge sent a schoolgirl thrill through me that was as embarrassing as it was undeniable. Professor Wilson, my graduate assistant, Emma, appeared at the door. "Your 9 o'clock class is waiting." "Yes, of course." I gathered my materials, slipping into the professional persona that was so familiar it felt like a second skin. Dr. Eleanor Wilson, distinguished professor of English literature, expert on female writers of the Victorian and modern periods, respected mentor to generations of students. Not a 66-year-old woman with an inconvenient attraction to her daughter's future father-in-law. As I walked across the autumn campus toward my classroom, I tried to put Douglas Parker firmly out of my mind. I had a marriage, a career, a life that made sense. One interesting conversation with an attractive man didn't change any of that. By the time Thursday's venue tour came around, this strange fluttering would surely have subsided. I believed that then, with the certainty of someone who had always lived according to plan. I couldn't have known how thoroughly that certainty would be shattered, or how hungry I actually was for precisely that shattering. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, a last golden breath of summer before autumn fully claimed New England. I dressed with care for the venue tour, a burgundy wrap dress I hadn't worn in some time, a silver necklace Richard had given me years ago, comfortable yet elegant heels. I told myself this attention to appearance was simply appropriate for the occasion. After all, we would be meeting with the event coordinator at the Wellington, one of Boston's most prestigious hotels. It had nothing to do with the fact that Douglas would be there. The Wellington stood in Back Bay, a grand dame among the historic buildings, its stone facade and brass revolving doors speaking of old money and timeless elegance. As I approached the entrance, I caught sight of my reflection in the polished glass. A slender woman with carefully styled gray auburn hair, posture straight from decades of classroom authority, eyes betraying a nervousness that seemed wholly inappropriate for a woman my age. "Get a grip, Eleanor," I muttered to myself as I pushed through the revolving door into the marble-floored lobby. Jessica spotted me immediately, waving from across the space where she stood with Nathan. And there beside them, engaged in conversation with a hotel staff member, was Douglas. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his tall frame perfectly, no tie, the top button of his crisp blue shirt undone in a way that somehow balanced formality and ease. He looked up as I approached, and the smile that lit his face seemed to warm the entire vast lobby. "Eleanor," he said, stepping forward to greet me. "Wonderful to see you again." "You too," I replied, aware of a slight tremor in my voice that I disguised by immediately turning to embrace Jessica. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late. Faculty meeting ran over." "Dad's running late too," Jessica said with a familiar mix of resignation and affection. "Conference call he couldn't reschedule, apparently." "Of course," I nodded, unsurprised. Richard's work had always taken precedence. "Ms. Winters, the event coordinator, was just showing us the main ballroom options," Douglas explained, gesturing toward the elegant young woman beside him. "Though I've been lobbying for a look at the rooftop garden as well. The view of the Charles at sunset is spectacular." "You've stayed here before?" I asked. "Several times for architecture conferences. The building itself is a landmark, Beaux-Arts style, completed in 1903. The moldings in the grand ballroom are original, hand-carved oak." His eyes brightened with enthusiasm. "I'm boring you with architectural details, aren't I?" "Not at all," I said truthfully. "I love historical buildings, the stories they contain." "Dad's obsessed with old buildings," Nathan interjected with good-natured eye-rolling. "Can't take him anywhere without getting a complete structural and historical analysis." "Occupational hazard," Douglas laughed. "Once you start seeing the bones of buildings, you can't unsee them." Ms. Winters cleared her throat gently. "Shall we begin the tour? We can start with the grand ballroom and work our way up to the rooftop garden." As we followed her across the lobby toward a sweeping staircase, Douglas fell into step beside me. "How has your week been?" he asked. Such a simple question, yet I couldn't remember the last time Richard had asked it with genuine interest. "Busy but good. I'm teaching a new seminar this semester on female modernist writers beyond Woolf. Juna Barnes, Jean Rhys, Elizabeth Bowen. Bowen, The Death of the Heart is extraordinary. That opening scene in the park has stayed with me for decades. His eyes were animated with authentic interest. I looked at him in surprise. You've read Elizabeth Bowen? Is that so shocking? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Most men I know haven't, that's all. Especially men outside academic circles. I had an English professor mother who believed in a well-rounded education, he explained, and architecture school taught me to appreciate all forms of design, including the way a skilled novelist designs and constructs a narrative. Our conversation continued as we toured the hotel's event spaces. The grand ballroom was indeed impressive, with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and the exquisite oak moldings Douglas had mentioned. The Wellington suite offered a more intimate setting with panoramic windows. Throughout, Douglas asked insightful questions about capacity, acoustics, lighting options, practical concerns that showed his professional eye for detail. Jessica and Nathan moved ahead with Ms. Winters to discuss catering options, leaving Douglas and me slightly behind as we climbed the final staircase to the rooftop garden. "How are you feeling about all this wedding planning?" he asked quietly. "It must be emotional, seeing your daughter take this step." The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "It is," I admitted. "Joyful, of course, but also strange. It makes you reflect on your own choices, your own path." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've been having similar thoughts. Watching Nathan commit to someone makes me think about my own marriage, the years with Catherine." His voice held a gentle sorrow when he spoke his late wife's name, but not the raw grief I had expected. 5 years was long enough, I supposed, for the sharpest edges of loss to soften. "Were you happy?" I asked, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "I'm sorry, that's far too personal a question." "No, it's a fair one." He paused at the landing, turning to face me. "Yes, we were happy, though not without our struggles. Catherine was brilliant, passionate about her work as a pediatric surgeon. She saved countless children's lives, but her schedule was brutal, and there were years when we barely saw each other." "That sounds familiar," I said with a rueful smile. "Corporate husband?" he guessed. "Is it that obvious? Let's just say I recognize the signs, the separate worlds, the parallel lives." His gaze was gentle, knowing. "Nathan mentioned your husband is some kind of executive? CFO at Wellington Financial. No relation to the hotel," I added with a small laugh. "Richard's brilliant with numbers, with strategy. He's built an impressive career." "But?" Douglas prompted softly. I hesitated, surprised at how easily this near stranger had detected the unspoken qualification in my words. "But his work has always been all-consuming. Even now, approaching retirement, he's constantly in meetings, on calls, traveling, leaving you on your own quite a bit, I imagine." "I've had my work too," I said, not wanting to sound like a neglected wife. "The university, my students, my writing. Still," Douglas said as we resumed climbing, "there's a difference between choosing solitude and having it imposed by circumstance." The observation was so accurate, so aligned with thoughts I'd barely articulated even to myself, that I felt momentarily exposed, as if he could see through the careful facade I'd constructed over decades. We emerged onto the rooftop garden, and the view momentarily stole my breath. Boston spread before us, the Charles River a silver ribbon winding between stately buildings and autumn-touched trees. The late afternoon sun gilded everything in warm light. "Worth the extra flight of stairs, isn't it?" Douglas said, coming to stand beside me at the stone balustrade. He was close enough that I could detect his cologne, something subtle with notes of cedar and bergamot. "Absolutely," I agreed, trying to focus on the view rather than his proximity. "Jessica would make a beautiful bride in this setting." "Nathan would be one lucky groom," he replied. But when I glanced up, I found he wasn't looking at the view or imagining the wedding. He was looking at me, with an expression that made my heart flutter in a way it hadn't in decades. "There you are!" Jessica's voice broke the moment as she and Nathan joined us on the terrace. "Isn't it perfect? I'm thinking ceremony here at sunset, then dinner and dancing in the grand ballroom." "It's lovely, sweetheart," I said, grateful for the interruption and the chance to collect myself. The venue tour concluded with a discussion of available dates and deposit requirements. As we prepared to leave, Richard finally arrived, offering perfunctory apologies and immediately engaging Ms. Winters in questions about contract terms and cancellation policies. "Always the financial mind," Douglas observed quietly as we watched Richard and the coordinator. "He wants to make sure Jessica gets the best deal," I said, feeling oddly defensive. Douglas's eyes met mine. "There are different kinds of presence, Eleanor. Physical attendance is just one form." Before I could respond to this gentle but pointed observation, Jessica approached with a suggestion for dinner. "Since we're all finally here, why don't we grab something to eat? There's a great restaurant just around the corner." Richard checked his watch, that perpetual gesture, and shook his head. "I've got a conference call with Tokyo at 8. Rain check?" The disappointment on Jessica's face was quickly masked, but I saw it, and I knew Douglas did too. "Of course, Dad. Another time." "I should get going as well," I said, suddenly needing space to process the conflicting emotions of the afternoon. "I have student papers to grade tonight." "Are you sure, Mom? It's just pasta." "Another time, sweetie," I promised, kissing her cheek. Douglas walked with me to the lobby as Richard made his goodbyes to the children and Ms. Winters. "Would you like me to hail you a cab?" he offered. "Thank you, but I drove. My car's in the garage next door." "I'll walk you then," he said simply. The short walk through the hotel's side entrance to the parking structure was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. When we reached my car, I turned to thank him and found him studying me with those perceptive gray eyes. "I enjoyed talking with you today, Eleanor," he said. "It's refreshing to have a conversation that goes beyond wedding centerpieces and seating arrangements." "I enjoyed it too," I admitted, keys clutched perhaps too tightly in my hand. "I'm staying in town until Sunday for some meetings with a potential client. Perhaps we could continue our discussion of Elizabeth Bowen over coffee? Saturday morning, if you're free?" The invitation hung in the air between us. I knew what the proper response should be: a polite demurral, a suggestion that we'd have plenty of time to chat during future wedding preparations. That would be the sensible, appropriate course. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'd like that." His smile was warm, genuine. "Excellent. There's a cafe called Trident on Newberry Street. Would 10 o'clock work?" "Perfect," I said, aware of crossing some invisible boundary, but unable to make myself step back. As I drove home through the gathering dusk, I tried to rationalize my decision. It was just coffee, just conversation with an intelligent man who shared my interests. There was nothing inappropriate about two in-laws-to-be getting better acquainted. I would tell Richard about it when I got home, mention it casually over dinner. But deep down, I knew. Something had ignited between Douglas Parker and me that afternoon on the rooftop garden. Something that had nothing to do with wedding plans and everything to do with feeling truly seen for the first time in years. And that something, however innocent it might appear on the surface, carried the dangerous potential to upend multiple lives, including my own. I didn't tell Richard about the coffee plan with Douglas. The opportunity arose. We ate dinner together that night, a rare occurrence these days, but the words stayed locked behind my lips. Richard spoke about his conference call with Tokyo, the quarterly projections, a potential retirement package for one of his VPs. I nodded in all the right places, asked appropriate questions, while a voice in my head whispered, "Tell him. Tell him you're meeting Douglas on Saturday." But I didn't, and my silence felt like the first betrayal. Friday passed in a blur of lectures and faculty meetings. I found myself distracted during discussions about curriculum changes and department funding, my mind wandering to that moment on the rooftop garden when Douglas had looked at me with such focused attention. During my office hours, a graduate student had to repeat her question about thesis revisions when I failed to respond the first time. "Are you feeling all right, Professor Wilson?" she asked with concern. Just a bit tired, I assured her, embarrassed to be caught daydreaming like a schoolgirl. That evening, as I stood in my closet deciding what to wear to bed, I caught myself wondering what I would wear to coffee the next day. The realization sent a jolt of alarm through me. This was ridiculous. I was a married woman of 66, a respected professor, mother of grown children. I had no business fretting over clothes for a casual coffee with my daughter's future father-in-law. Nevertheless, I found myself selecting a midnight blue blouse the next morning. One that Jessica had once mentioned brought out the blue in my eyes. I paired it with well-tailored gray slacks and a silver pendant necklace, casual but elegant. I applied makeup with more care than usual for a Saturday, adding a touch of mascara, a hint of rose-colored lipstick. "Heading to campus?" Richard asked, barely glancing up from his newspaper as I came downstairs. "Meeting a colleague for coffee," I replied, the half-truth bitter on my tongue. "Some questions about the Victorian Literature Survey course I'm teaching next semester." He nodded, already turning the page. "I'll be at the club most of the day, racquetball with Jim, then lunch with the finance committee." How easy it was to live parallel lives, I thought, as I drove toward Newbury Street. How comfortable we had become with our separate routines, our separate interests, our separate worlds. When had we stopped sharing the small details of our days? When had we stopped being curious about each other's thoughts, feelings, plans? The Trident Cafe was busy, but not overcrowded, a cozy space filled with bookshelves and the rich aroma of fresh coffee. Douglas was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 cups before him. "I hope you don't mind," he said, rising as I approached. "I took the liberty of ordering for you. Black coffee with 1 sugar, if I remember correctly from dinner the other night." I was touched that he had noticed, had remembered this small detail. "Perfect, thank you." He held my chair, a courteous gesture rarely seen these days. As I settled across from him, I noticed he looked different in casual clothes. Dark jeans, a forest green sweater over a button-down shirt, leather boots. Less formal than the business attire I'd seen him in before, but no less distinguished. If anything, the relaxed clothing emphasized his natural elegance. "You look lovely today," he said, his eyes warm with appreciation, but not intrusive. "Thank you." I felt a blush rising to my cheeks and quickly changed the subject. "Have you had a productive few days in Boston?" "Very. The potential client is interested in renovating a historic building in Beacon Hill, right up my alley. And of course, any time spent with Nathan is a bonus. He seems so happy with Jessica." "She's happy too," I said sincerely. "Happier than I've seen her in a long time." "It's a wonderful thing to see our children find their match, isn't it?" There was genuine joy in his voice, but also a hint of something else, perhaps wistfulness. "Catherine would have loved Jessica. She always wanted a daughter." "Nathan speaks very highly of her," I said gently. "She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." His expression softened with memory. "Dedicated, brilliant, compassionate, the perfect mother for Nathan." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "But I've learned that people can be perfect for certain roles in our lives while still not being completely perfect for us." The statement hung in the air between us, laden with implications. I found myself unable to meet his eyes, instead focusing on my coffee cup. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "That was perhaps too personal a reflection." "No, it's all right." I looked up at him. "I understand what you mean. We build these lives, these partnerships, based on who we are at 25 or 30. And then we grow and change, but the structures we've built don't always change with us." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "Exactly. Catherine and I made a good life together, raised a wonderful son. I loved her deeply and mourned her just as deeply. But in the years since she's been gone, I've had time to reflect on our marriage with more perspective." "And what have you concluded?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That love takes many forms. That compatibility in youth doesn't always translate to compatibility in later years. That two good people can build a good life together without necessarily fulfilling each other completely. He paused. Am I making any sense, or just rambling like a maudlin widower? I laughed softly. You're making perfect sense. More than you know. Your turn, he said, his eyes gentle but penetrating. 40 years with Richard, the successful executive and the distinguished professor. The perfect power couple, at least on paper. We've had a good life, I said automatically, the standard response whenever anyone inquired about my marriage. I don't doubt that for a moment, Douglas replied, but that's not what I asked. I stared at him, caught off guard by his perceptiveness and his directness. No one ever questioned the pat answers, the social scripts we all followed. No one ever pushed past the veneer of contented, long-term marriage. It's complicated, I finally said. We built exactly the life we planned to build. Successful careers, beautiful home, accomplished children. On paper, as you said, it's perfect. And off paper? I looked down at my hands, the gold band that had encircled my finger for 4 decades, gleaming dully in the cafe's warm light. Off paper, there's a distance that has grown over the years. A silence that started as comfortable and gradually became empty. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating, putting into words the feelings I had barely acknowledged even to myself. Does Richard know how you feel? I shook my head. We don't really talk about feelings anymore. We talk about schedules, about the children, about practical matters. We coordinate rather than communicate. That sounds lonely, Douglas said softly. The simple observation, spoken with such understanding, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I blinked them back, determined not to become emotional in a public cafe. I'm sorry, he said immediately. I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't, I assured him, managing a smile. It's just, no one has asked me these kinds of questions in a very long time. I'm not sure I've even asked them of myself. He nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. Let's talk about something else. Tell me about your work, the female modernists beyond Woolf that you mentioned. Grateful for the change of subject, I began describing my current research project, an examination of how women writers of the early 20th century navigated the tension between tradition and modernity, between societal expectations and personal freedom. As I spoke, I felt myself relax, energized by discussing ideas that mattered to me with someone who seemed genuinely interested. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from literature to architecture, from academic politics to travel experiences, from music to art. We discovered shared tastes in jazz and French cinema, a mutual dislike of reality television and processed food, a common habit of reading poetry before bed. Each revelation, however small, felt like uncovering a precious stone, unexpected, delightful, valuable. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. When I finally glanced at my watch, I was shocked to see it was nearly 1 o'clock. I've kept you far too long, Douglas said, noticing my surprise. Time seems to behave differently in your company, Eleanor. The way he said my name, with a hint of lingering on the first syllable, as if savoring it, sent a small shiver through me. I've enjoyed our conversation, I said truthfully. As have I. He hesitated, then added, would it be too forward to suggest we might do this again? Perhaps next time I'm in Boston for wedding planning? The proper answer was clear. This had been pleasant, but should remain a one-time occurrence. Any further one-on-one meetings would be crossing a line, especially given the strange attraction I couldn't deny feeling toward him. Yet once again, I heard myself giving a different answer than propriety dictated. I'd like that. His smile illuminated his entire face. I'm glad. As he walked me to my car, his hand briefly touched the small of my back, a gesture so slight it could have been accidental, yet it sent warmth spreading through me like brandy on a cold night. Safe drive home, Eleanor, he said, opening my car door for me. Thank you for making my Saturday infinitely more interesting than client meetings. Thank you for the coffee. And the conversation. Driving home, I felt a curious mixture of elation and guilt. Nothing inappropriate had happened. We'd simply had coffee and conversation in a public place. Yet I knew in my heart that something had shifted, some boundary had been crossed. Not in actions, but in possibilities. I had felt more alive, more seen, more engaged in those 2 hours than I had in years. And that realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Because what did it say about the life I had built with Richard? What did it say about the choices I had made, the compromises I had accepted, the silence I had learned to live with? More importantly, what would happen now? The 3 weeks between my coffee with Douglas and Jessica's engagement party unfolded in a strange haze of anticipation and guilt. We exchanged a few innocent texts. He sent a photo of a first edition Elizabeth Bowen he'd found in a New York bookshop. I shared an article about Beaux-Arts architecture I'd come across in my research. Each message was perfectly appropriate, yet charged with unspoken meaning, at least on my end. Richard noticed nothing, of course. He was consumed with a potential merger at work, coming home late and leaving early, his mind perpetually elsewhere even when his body was present. When he asked about wedding preparations, it was with the distracted air of someone fulfilling a social obligation rather than genuine interest. "Everything's on track," I told him during one of our brief dinners together. "Jessica has chosen the Wellington for both ceremony and reception. The engagement party is there next Saturday." He nodded, making a note in his phone calendar. "Black tie?" "Cocktail attire. Jessica wanted something elegant but not overly formal." "I'll have Diane order some flowers to be delivered," he said, referring to his administrative assistant who handled such personal details for him. I wanted to object. Shouldn't a father choose flowers for his daughter's engagement party himself? But held my tongue. This was our way now, had been our way for decades. Practical, efficient, emotionless. Jessica, meanwhile, was caught up in a whirlwind of excitement. She called nearly every day with updates about dresses, flowers, menu options. I listened with genuine happiness for her, while a small, shameful part of me counted down the days until I would see Douglas again. The night of the engagement party arrived with picture-perfect October weather, cool but not cold, the trees in the public garden across from the Wellington ablaze with autumn colors. I dressed with particular care in a deep emerald cocktail dress I'd purchased specially for the occasion, its cut modest yet flattering to my still slender figure. Richard complimented me perfunctorily as we left the house, his mind clearly already on the social networking he planned to do at the event. The Wellington's mezzanine level had been transformed for the party. Soft lighting from crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over elegant flower arrangements in autumn hues. A string quartet played classical pieces in one corner, while waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Jessica and Nathan stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. She radiant in a champagne-colored dress, he handsome and proud beside her. "Mom! Dad!" Jessica embraced us warmly. "You look gorgeous, Mom. That color is amazing on you." "Thank you, sweetheart. Everything looks beautiful." I hugged her tightly, genuinely moved by her happiness. "You've done an incredible job with the planning." "Actually, Douglas helped a lot," she said, surprising me. "He knows the events director here and got us some special touches included." She gestured toward the custom ice sculpture depicting Boston's skyline and the elaborate flower wall perfect for photos. "That was very kind of him," I managed, my pulse quickening at the mention of his name. "He's around somewhere," Nathan said, looking over the growing crowd. "Probably charming someone's grandmother. He has a gift for that." I moved through the party in a state of heightened awareness, exchanging pleasantries with Jessica's friends and colleagues, Richard's business associates, family members from both sides. All the while, I was conscious of searching the room for Douglas, both dreading and longing for our first encounter since that coffee shop morning. I was speaking with Nathan's aunt when I felt it, that peculiar awareness of being watched. I turned slightly and saw him across the room, impeccable in a charcoal suit with a silver tie that matched his hair. Our eyes met, and he smiled. A smile that felt like a private message in the crowded room. A few minutes later, As I stood alone briefly near one of the flower arrangements, he approached. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm, "you look absolutely stunning this evening. Thank you." I felt heat rise to my cheeks like a much younger woman. "Jessica tells me you had a hand in these beautiful decorations. Just a few suggestions. Your daughter has excellent taste." He stood beside me, a respectable distance between us, but close enough that I could detect his cologne. "Is Richard here? I should say hello." "In the corner, talking with some banking colleagues." I gestured toward my husband, deep in conversation with 3 men in nearly identical suits. Douglas nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. Still working, even at his daughter's engagement party. "That's Richard," I said, unable to keep a hint of resignation from my voice. "And how have you been, Eleanor? Our text exchanges have been a bright spot in my otherwise mundane weeks." "For me as well," I admitted quietly, looking down at my champagne flute. "Though I've felt somewhat conflicted about them." "Because you're married," he stated simply. "Yes, I understand." He paused, his expression serious. "I would never want to cause you discomfort or compromise your principles, Eleanor. If you prefer, we keep our interactions strictly related to wedding planning. I'll respect that completely." The graceful offer touched me deeply. "That's very considerate of you. But," he continued, his voice lowering slightly, "I would be less than honest if I didn't tell you that I find myself thinking about you far more than is appropriate for my son's future mother-in-law." The candid admission sent a shock through me. Until that moment, I had been able to maintain the fiction, at least partially, that my feelings were one-sided, that Douglas was simply being friendly and intellectual. Now, with those words hanging between us, the pretense was impossible. "I don't know how to respond to that," I said honestly. "You don't need to respond at all," he assured me. "I just wanted you to know that you're not alone in whatever you might be feeling, and that I respect you too much to play games or create situations that might compromise your marriage." Before I could formulate a reply, we were interrupted by the event coordinator announcing that dinner would be served in 20 minutes. The moment broke, and Douglas excused himself to speak with some of Nathan's relatives, leaving me with my thoughts in disarray. During dinner, I was seated between Richard and Jessica's godmother, with Douglas at a different table across the room. I ate mechanically, laughed at the appropriate moments during the toasts, played my role of proud mother with practiced ease. Yet all the while, I was acutely conscious of Douglas's presence, of the occasional glances we exchanged across the crowded room. After dinner came dancing. Richard, predictably, begged off. 2 left feet, he joked to those nearby, though the truth was, he simply had no interest. He retreated to the bar with his business associates, leaving me to watch as Jessica and Nathan took to the floor for the first dance. I stood at the edge of the dance area, genuinely moved by the sight of my daughter in the arms of the man she loved, their faces alight with joy and promise. This was what marriage should be, I thought. This radiance, this certainty, this deep connection. "They look happy, don't they?" Douglas appeared beside me, his expression soft as he watched his son. "Very," I agreed. "Would you care to dance, Eleanor?" he asked after a moment. "Purely ceremonial, of course. The mother of the bride and father of the groom. People would expect it." It was a plausible excuse, one that would raise no eyebrows. Still, I hesitated. "I'm not sure that's wise." "Probably not," he acknowledged with a small smile. "But then, wisdom is sometimes overrated, isn't it?" Something in his tone, a gentle challenge perhaps, or an invitation to step outside the careful boundaries of my life, made me nod. One dance. He led me onto the floor as the quartet began a waltz. His hand at my waist was warm, respectful, yet I felt the contact like an electric current. We moved together with surprising ease, as if our bodies recognized a rhythm our minds were still grappling to understand. "You're a beautiful dancer," he said. "Thank you. It's been a while since I've had the opportunity." "Richard doesn't dance?" I shook my head. "He used to, early in our marriage. At faculty events, charity galas. But not for many years now. His loss, Douglas said simply. We continued in silence for a moment, the music flowing around us, other couples moving nearby. Yet I felt as if we were somehow alone in our own private world. I should apologize for what I said earlier, Douglas finally spoke. It was inappropriate. It was honest, I countered, and I've had enough politeness and appropriate behavior to last a lifetime. The words surprised me as much as him. Where had that come from? That wasn't Eleanor Wilson, respected professor and devoted wife of 40 years. Yet it felt true, deeply, undeniably true. The waltz ended, and propriety dictated we should part. Instead, Douglas kept hold of my hand as another, slower song began. "One more?" he asked, his eyes holding mine. I nodded, unable to voice the yes that would make this deliberate choice rather than mere acquiescence. We resumed our dance, closer now, his hand slightly firmer at my waist. I was conscious of my breathing, of the subtle cologne he wore, of the way his gray eyes never left mine. "I need some air," I said suddenly, feeling overwhelmed by his proximity, by my own confusing emotions. "Of course." He immediately led me toward the French doors that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the public garden. The night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the ballroom. I moved to the stone railing, taking deep breaths, trying to center myself. Douglas stood nearby, giving me space, yet I was acutely aware of his presence. "I'm sorry," I said after a moment. "This is all very confusing." "I know." He moved closer, not touching me but near enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "For me too." I turned to face him, finding his expression serious, intent. "What are we doing, Douglas?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I only know that from the moment I met you, I felt something I haven't felt in years, a connection, a recognition." "I'm married," I whispered. "I know," he repeated, his voice gentle, "and I would never ask you to—" The balcony door opened, voices spilling out as a laughing couple emerged, then retreated upon seeing the space already occupied. "Perhaps we should go back inside," I suggested, suddenly aware of how our private conversation might appear to others. Douglas nodded, but as we turned toward the door, he touched my arm lightly. "There's a small reading room off the main corridor, less crowded. We could continue our conversation there." I knew I should decline, should return to the party, to Richard, to my proper place as mother of the bride. The sensible Eleanor, the Eleanor I had been for decades, would do exactly that. Instead, I heard myself say, "Lead the way." The reading room was a small, elegant space lined with bookshelves, the kind of room where hotel guests might retreat with a novel or newspaper, though tonight it stood empty, the engagement party having taken over the main event spaces. A single lamp cast a warm glow over leather armchairs and a small writing desk. Through the windows, city lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Douglas closed the door behind us, not completely, but enough to muffle the sounds of the party. Music, laughter, clinking glasses, creating a cocoon of quiet that felt both comforting and dangerous. "We shouldn't be here," I said, even as I moved further into the room. "Probably not," he agreed, maintaining a respectful distance. "But I think we need to address what's happening between us, Eleanor. Ignoring it doesn't seem to be working." I sank into one of the armchairs, suddenly weary from the emotional tension I'd been carrying for weeks. "And what exactly is happening between us? Two mature adults developing a friendship? An inappropriate attraction? A midlife crisis?" He smiled at my attempt at humor, settling into the chair opposite mine. "I don't think there's a simple label for it. All I know is that since I met you, I've been more awake, more alive, finding myself thinking about you at odd moments, looking forward to your texts, imagining conversations we might have." His honesty disarmed me. "I've felt the same," I admitted quietly, "and it terrifies me. Because of Richard. Because of Richard. Because of Jessica and Nathan. Because of my entire life that's built on certain choices, certain commitments." I twisted my wedding band unconsciously, And because at 66, I thought I was beyond this, whatever this is. Desire? He suggested gently. Connection? The recognition of a kindred spirit? I looked up at him, at the understanding in his eyes, and felt something inside me crumble, some wall I'd built around my emotions over decades of practiced restraint. All of those things, I whispered, and it makes no sense. We barely know each other. We've had one coffee, exchanged a few texts. This isn't rational. The heart isn't rational, Eleanor. Neither is the soul. He leaned forward, not touching me, but closing the distance between us slightly. I spent 2 years after Catherine died wondering if I'd ever feel anything again, anything beyond basic functioning. Then you walked into that restaurant, and something woke up. I don't understand it either, but I know it's real. Even if it is, I countered, what good can come of it? I'm married. Our children are engaged. The potential for hurt, for scandal, for damage. I know, he interrupted gently. Believe me, I've had the same thoughts. I've told myself repeatedly to step back, to keep things purely cordial. And yet, I echoed, the two simple words containing all the complexity of our situation. For a moment, we sat in silence, the ticking of a small clock on the mantelpiece the only sound beyond our breathing. Through the partially open door came strains of music from the party, our children's party, a reminder of all the lives intertwined with ours, all the responsibilities we carried. Tell me about your marriage, Eleanor, Douglas finally said, not the surface version, the truth. The question should have felt invasive, inappropriate. Instead, it felt like an opening, a chance to articulate thoughts I'd buried for years. I searched for the right words. It's like a well-crafted novel with no emotional core. All the elements are there, structure, characters, setting. But the heart is missing. I paused, surprised by my own analogy. Richard and I built exactly the life we planned to build. Successful careers, beautiful home, brilliant children. It all looks perfect from the outside. And from the inside? From the inside, it's empty. The admission felt like betrayal, yet also like liberation. We haven't truly connected in years, maybe decades. We occupy the same space, but live in separate worlds. Have you tried to change that? His question held no judgment, only gentle curiosity. At times. Early on, when I first noticed the distance growing, I remembered those attempts, suggesting vacations together, date nights, marriage counseling once. Richard didn't see a problem. We were both busy with our careers, raising children. The distance seemed functional to him, efficient. And gradually you accepted that. Yes. The simple admission carried the weight of years of compromise, of lowered expectations, of resigned acceptance. I focused on my work, my students, my writing. I told myself it was normal, that passion fades, that companionship and shared history were enough. And were they? His eyes held mine, gentle but unwilling to let me hide behind comfortable fictions. No, I whispered, the word barely audible. But admitting that felt like failing somehow, like betraying the choices I'd made, the life I'd built. Douglas nodded, understanding evident in his expression. After Catherine died, I found myself looking back on our marriage with new clarity. We loved each other deeply, but there were parts of ourselves we never shared, spaces we never bridged. I wondered if that's just the nature of long relationships, that certain disconnections are inevitable. And what conclusion did you reach? That perhaps they're common, but not inevitable. He smiled sadly. But by then, of course, it was too late to bridge those gaps with her. We sat with that thought for a moment, the poignancy of his realization hanging in the air between us. What are you looking for, Douglas? I finally asked, needing clarity, needing to understand what was happening before it carried us any further. He considered the question carefully. I'm not looking to disrupt your marriage, Eleanor. I'm not plotting to steal you away or create some dramatic upheaval. That's not who I am. Then what? I'm drawn to you. Intellectually, emotionally, yes, physically too. His honesty was both disarming and refreshing. I find myself wanting to know you, to understand you, to spend time with you. Beyond that, I don't know. I haven't planned that far ahead. The answer both relieved and disappointed me. Part of me, the reckless, hungry part I barely recognized, wanted him to declare something more definitive, more sweeping. The more rational part was grateful for his restraint, his respect for the complexities of our situation. And what about you, Eleanor? What are you looking for? The question caught me off guard. What was I looking for? I hadn't allowed myself to consider that, too focused on what I shouldn't want, shouldn't feel, shouldn't do. I don't know, I admitted. I feel as if I've woken up from a long sleep, and everything looks different. I'm not sure what I want, but I know that being with you, talking with you, connecting with you, makes me feel alive in a way I haven't in years. His expression softened at my words. Something like tenderness mixed with desire in his eyes. That's enough for now, isn't it? To recognize that connection without needing to define where it leads? Perhaps, I conceded, though a lifetime of careful planning, of knowing exactly where each step would lead, made such uncertainty discomforting. A burst of laughter from the hallway reminded us of the world beyond this quiet room, the engagement party, our children, my husband, our responsibilities. We should go back, I said reluctantly. People will notice our absence. You're right. He stood, offering his hand to help me from my chair. I hesitated for a moment before taking it, knowing that even this simple touch represented another boundary crossed. His hand was warm, strong, the contact sending a current of awareness through me. As I rose, we stood closer than we had before, close enough that I could see the varying shades of gray in his eyes, the slight crease between his brows, the way his silver hair waved slightly at his temples. Eleanor, he said softly, my name a question and a statement all at once. What happened next occurred with the dreamlike quality of events that seemed simultaneously inevitable and impossible. His free hand rose to gently touch my cheek, a whisper of contact that somehow conveyed more intimacy than any embrace. I should have stepped back, should have politely established distance, should have reminded him and myself of all the reasons this couldn't happen. Instead, I remained perfectly still, my eyes holding his, my heart racing with an excitement I hadn't felt in decades. Time seemed suspended, the moment stretching into a crossroads where multiple futures diverged based on what would happen next. Then, with a gentleness that nearly broke my heart, Douglas leaned forward and brushed his lips against mine. The kiss was brief, tentative, a question more than a demand. Yet in that fleeting contact, something profound shifted within me, as if a key had turned in a lock I hadn't known existed, opening a door to feelings, possibilities, hungers I had long ago relegated to the past. He drew back, studying my reaction, his expression a mixture of wonder and concern. I'm sorry, he began. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize, I whispered, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Please, don't apologize for that. A small smile touched his lips, relief and pleasure mingling in his eyes. We should rejoin the party, he said, though his tone suggested the last thing he wanted was to return to the crowd, to pretend we were merely cordial in-laws to be. Yes, I agreed, smoothing my dress, checking that my hair was still in place. You go first. I'll wait a few minutes. He nodded, understanding the need for discretion. At the door, he paused, looking back at me with an expression I would carry with me for days afterward. Tender, questioning, hopeful. Until next time, Eleanor, he said softly. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with the thundering of my heart and the knowledge that my life had just veered onto a path I had never anticipated. The days following Jessica's engagement party passed in a strange haze of conflicting emotions. Outwardly, my routine remained unchanged. Lectures to deliver, department meetings to attend, student papers to grade. I moved through these familiar motions with practiced ease, while my mind continually circled back to that moment in the reading room, to the gentle pressure of Douglas's lips against mine, to the awakening I had felt in that brief contact. I hadn't heard from him since the party, a silence I found both relieving and disappointing. Perhaps he had thought better of our interaction, recognized the potential complications, and decided to step back. The rational part of me knew this would be for the best. The newly awakened part ached at the possibility. A week after the party, as I was preparing for bed, my phone chimed with a text message. I reached for it, expecting Jessica with another wedding question. Instead, I saw Douglas's name. I've tried to write this message a dozen times and deleted it each time, but I can't stop thinking about you, about our conversation, about that moment. I'm in Boston again next Friday for meetings. Would you have dinner with me? I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Dinner was different from coffee. Dinner was evening, intimate, undeniably date-like. To accept would be a deliberate step across a line I had never imagined crossing in 40 years of marriage. Richard was already asleep beside me, his reading glasses still perched on his nose, a financial journal open on his chest. Looking at him, this familiar stranger I had shared my life with, I felt a complex tangle of emotions: loyalty, guilt, resignation, and an unexpected thread of resentment. How many years had it been since he had truly seen me? Since he had reached for me with desire rather than habit? Since he had been curious about my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams? I picked up my phone and typed a reply before I could talk myself out of it. Yes, where and when. His response came almost immediately. Soralina, 7:30. I'll make the reservation. Thank you, Eleanor. That simple thank you conveyed a world of understanding, acknowledgement of what this decision meant, appreciation for the complexity of my position. It was this sensitivity, this emotional intelligence, that drew me to Douglas as much as any physical attraction. I set my phone on the nightstand and gently removed the journal and glasses from Richard's sleeping form. He didn't stir, hadn't for years. Once, early in our marriage, I could never move without him instinctively reaching for me, even in sleep. I couldn't remember when that had stopped, when the invisible thread connecting us had frayed and finally broken. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October, as if the weather itself were conspiring to make my path easier. I told Richard I had a faculty dinner, a lie that tasted bitter but came with surprising ease. He barely looked up from his laptop, nodding absently, already forgetting the information as soon as he'd received it. I dressed with care in my campus office after my last class. A burgundy wrap dress I rarely wore, low-heeled leather boots, a simple gold necklace. I applied makeup with more attention than usual, adding a touch of eyeshadow, a hint of blush, a deeper shade of lipstick than my typical neutral tone. Looking in the small mirror I kept in my desk drawer, I barely recognized myself, not because of the makeup, but because of the light in my eyes, the slight flush to my cheeks that had nothing to do with cosmetics. Soralina was an upscale Italian restaurant in Back Bay, intimate without being overtly romantic, elegant without being intimidating. I arrived 5 minutes early, my stomach fluttering with nerves I hadn't experienced since graduate school. The maitre d' led me to a corner table where Douglas was already waiting, standing as I approached. "Eleanor," he said, my name like a caress on his lips. "Thank you for coming." He looked handsome, in a charcoal suit with no tie, his silver hair catching the warm lighting of the restaurant. But it was his expression that caught my breath, the way his eyes lit up when he saw me, as if I were a gift he hadn't dared hope for. "You look beautiful," he said, as I took my seat, his gaze appreciative without being invasive. "Thank you," I replied, smoothing my napkin across my lap to hide the slight tremor in my hands. "You look quite nice yourself." A waiter appeared with menus and a wine list. Douglas ordered a bottle of Barolo after a brief consultation with me about my preferences. Once the waiter had gone, a slight awkwardness descended, the reality of what we were doing suddenly palpable. "How has your week been?" Douglas asked, his voice gentle, offering the safety of conventional conversation. Busy. End-of-term pressures are mounting, and Jessica calls daily with wedding questions. I paused, the mention of Jessica bringing our complicated situation into sharp focus. She's thinking about New Year's Eve for the wedding date. Nathan mentioned that, a symbolic fresh start. His expression grew thoughtful. Eleanor, if you're uncomfortable with this, with us having dinner, we can treat it as a wedding planning discussion between future in-laws. No expectations beyond that. The gracious offer touched me deeply. That's very considerate of you. I meant what I said in my text. I can't stop thinking about you, about that moment at the party. But the last thing I want is to cause you distress or put you in an impossible position. The wine arrived, a welcome interruption as the sommelier went through the ritual of presentation, uncorking, and tasting. When we were alone again, glasses filled with ruby liquid, I found my courage. I can't stop thinking about it either, I admitted quietly, which terrifies me if I'm being honest. This isn't who I am, Douglas. I've never. I trailed off, not needing to complete the sentence. Never considered being unfaithful, he finished gently. I understand. It speaks to your character, your integrity. Yet here I am, I said with a small, rueful laugh, having dinner with a man who isn't my husband, wearing a dress I specifically chose, hoping you would find me attractive. He smiled, his eyes warming. Mission accomplished on that front. The waiter returned for our orders, roasted scallops for me, osso buco for Douglas. As we handed back the menus, our fingers brushed briefly, the small contact sending a current of awareness through me that was both thrilling and unsettling. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Douglas said once we were alone again, his tone shifting to something more intimate. I considered the unusual request. That's quite a challenging opening. I find conventional dinner conversation dull, especially when what I really want to know is who you are beneath the accomplished professor, the devoted mother, the dutiful wife. His directness was refreshing after decades of polite, surface-level interactions. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. I've never told anyone that I sometimes regret choosing the safer path in my academic career. I specialized in established female writers, Woolf, Austen, the Brontes, instead of following my deeper interest in obscure experimental writers from the period, the unrecognized voices. Why the safer path? Pragmatism, tenure considerations, the expectations of the department. I traced the rim of my wineglass, and perhaps a certain risk aversion that seems to have characterized many of my life choices. Including marriage? He asked gently. I met his eyes, surprised by his perceptiveness. Perhaps. Richard was a sensible choice, stable, ambitious, from a good family. My parents approved wholeheartedly. And now? His question hung in the air between us, laden with implications. Now, I wonder what my life might have been if I'd chosen differently. If I'd prioritized passion over pragmatism, uncertainty over security. I paused, realizing how revealing the admission was. Your turn. Something you've never told anyone. He considered for a moment, his expression growing more serious. I've never told anyone how lonely I was in my marriage at times, despite loving Catherine deeply. She was brilliant, compassionate, dedicated to her patients. But there were parts of myself, my love of poetry, my interest in philosophy, my occasional melancholy, that she never fully understood or engaged with. And you never expressed this to her? I tried early on, but she was so practical, so focused on concrete realities. When I would wax philosophical, she would gently redirect the conversation to plans for the weekend or updates on Nathan's activities. He smiled sadly. It wasn't her fault. We were simply wired differently in some fundamental ways. Yet you stayed faithful, committed. Yes, because I did love her, and our life together was good in many important ways. I accepted that no one person can fulfill every need, meet every longing. He took a sip of wine. But since her passing, I found myself wondering if I settled for less connection than was possible. Our first courses arrived, his carpaccio, my arugula salad, providing a moment to absorb the unexpected depth of our exchange. We had moved far beyond polite dinner conversation into territory that felt both dangerous and essential. As we ate, our discussion flowed with surprising ease from literature to politics, from architecture to music. Douglas shared stories of his most challenging design projects. I told him about my sabbatical year in London, researching Virginia Woolf's manuscripts. We discovered shared tastes in French cinema and Italian opera, a mutual dislike of social media and reality television. With each revelation, each point of connection, I felt something inside me unfurling, a part of myself that had been carefully tucked away for decades, preserved but untouched. Douglas not only listened to my thoughts and opinions, but engaged with them, challenged them, built upon them in ways that made our conversation feel like an intricate dance, each step leading naturally to the next. By the time dessert arrived, a dark chocolate torte with espresso gelato to share. A warm intimacy had developed between us that went far beyond physical attraction. This, I realized, was what I had been missing without fully understanding its absence. This intellectual and emotional engagement, this sense of being truly seen and heard by another person. "Will you walk with me a bit?" Douglas asked as we left the restaurant. The night is unusually warm, and the common is beautiful this time of year. Prudence dictated that I should decline, should head home to Richard and the safety of familiar routines. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'd like that." We strolled along the lamplit paths of Boston Common, close but not touching, our conversation continuing its easy flow. Near the frog pond, Douglas paused, turning to face me. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I want to be completely honest with you. Tonight has only confirmed what I've felt since we met, that there's something rare and precious between us, something I haven't experienced in a very long time, perhaps ever." My heart raced at his words, at the intensity in his eyes. "I feel it too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Where does that leave us?" he asked, the question encompassing all the complexity of our situation. My marriage, our children, the geographical distance between Boston and New York, the lives we had built separately. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "This is uncharted territory for me." He nodded, understanding in his expression, for me as well. He reached out slowly, giving me time to withdraw if I chose, and took my hand in his. "All I know is that I'm not ready to walk away from whatever this is between us." His fingers intertwined with mine, warm and strong, the simple contact more intimate than I had expected. Standing there in the soft glow of the park lamps, leaves rustling gently overhead, I felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Poised on the edge of a precipice, knowing that my next choice would set in motion consequences I couldn't fully predict or control. "Neither am I," I whispered, and with those 3 words, I took a step into the unknown. The weeks following my dinner with Douglas took on a dreamlike quality. We established a rhythm of communication that became the hidden heartbeat of my days. Text messages in the morning and evening, occasional phone calls when circumstances allowed privacy, a shared digital commonplace book where we recorded quotes, observations, and thoughts for each other. Each connection, however brief, felt like a lifeline drawing me toward a version of myself I was only beginning to recognize. We managed 2 more meetings before Thanksgiving, another dinner when Douglas was in Boston for a client presentation, and a seemingly chance encounter at the Museum of Fine Arts that we had carefully orchestrated. Each time, the connection between us deepened, the attraction grew more undeniable. Yet we maintained certain boundaries, both physical and emotional, conscious of the complexity of our situation. Meanwhile, wedding plans accelerated as Jessica and Nathan settled on New Year's Eve for their ceremony. I threw myself into mother-of-the-bride duties with perhaps too much enthusiasm, grateful for the legitimate excuse to be in frequent contact with Douglas about venues, vendors, and various logistics. "Mom, you and Douglas have really bonded over this wedding planning," Jessica commented during a cake tasting in early December. It's so sweet. Nathan says his dad hasn't been this engaged in anything since before his mom died. I managed a neutral smile, guilt twisting beneath my breastbone. He's very invested in Nathan's happiness, I replied, focusing intently on comparing buttercream flavors. Unlike Dad, Jessica added with a hint of bitterness. He still hasn't found time to meet with the tuxedo rental place, and the wedding's less than a month away. I sighed, unable to defend Richard's detachment, but uncomfortable with the emerging dynamic where Douglas was being cast as the involved parent, while my husband appeared disinterested. It felt dangerously close to creating a narrative that might justify my growing emotional infidelity. Your father shows love in his own way, I said, the words so practiced they emerged automatically. He's covering all the wedding expenses without question. Jessica rolled her eyes, a gesture that transported me back to her teenage years. Yes, throwing money at things is definitely Dad's love language. The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Richard's approach to family had always been primarily financial, providing well, ensuring security, building educational funds. The emotional labor, the day-to-day nurturing, the presence at school events and doctor appointments, these had fallen to me almost exclusively. For years I had accepted this division, had even defended it to friends who questioned the imbalance. Now, seeing it through Jessica's eyes, and increasingly through my own newly awakening perspective, I found myself questioning what I had so long rationalized. 2 weeks before Christmas, the collision I had been dreading finally occurred. Jessica had organized a pre-holiday dinner at her apartment for both sets of parents, a blending of families before the official wedding festivities. It would be the first time Richard and Douglas would interact extensively, and the thought filled me with anxiety. Looking forward to tonight? Richard asked as we drove to Jessica's Cambridge apartment, his tone suggesting the dinner was merely another social obligation to be checked off a list. Yes, I replied, keeping my eyes on the snowy road. It will be nice to get to know Nathan's father better. Richard murmured non-committally, returning his attention to his phone. Seems like you've already been handling most of that wedding coordination with him. I glanced at him sharply, searching for any hint of suspicion in his tone, but his expression remained neutral, uninterested. Someone has to, I replied, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. And you're so good at it, Eleanor, he said, with what he clearly thought was a complimentary smile. You know I'm hopeless with those details. I didn't respond, focusing instead on finding parking in the crowded neighborhood. By the time we arrived at Jessica's door, I had composed myself, determined to navigate the evening with grace, despite the emotional minefield it represented. The apartment was warm and festive, a small Christmas tree twinkling in one corner, delicious aromas emanating from the kitchen where Nathan was putting final touches on dinner. Jessica greeted us with hugs, taking our coats and offering wine. Douglas is already here, she informed us, leading the way to the living room. He brought the most amazing French wine. And there he was, rising from the sofa as we entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his eyes, when they met mine, conveyed a silent private greeting that seemed to bypass all barriers. Richard, he said, extending his hand to my husband. Good to see you again. I think we've only met briefly at the engagement party. Right, yes, Richard replied with his professional smile, the one he used at corporate functions when engaging with people he had no personal interest in. Douglas, was it? Nathan's father? That's right, Douglas Parker. I'm an architect based in New York. The two men shook hands, a study in contrasts, Douglas tall and silver-haired with his expressive eyes and warm demeanor, Richard trim and polished with his corporate bearing and practiced charm. For a disconcerting moment, I saw them as a stranger might. Two successful men in their late 60s, both handsome in their different ways, both accomplished in their fields. The fact that I was married to one while harboring deepening feelings for the other seemed suddenly absurd, like something from a French farce. The dinner progressed with surprising smoothness. Jessica and Nathan, clearly relieved that their parents were getting along, kept the conversation flowing around wedding details, their work, plans for the new year. Richard, always capable of social performance when required, asked appropriate questions about Nathan's engineering career and Douglas's architectural practice. Douglas responded with genuine engagement, drawing Richard into discussions about the Boston real estate market and sustainable building practices that actually seemed to capture my husband's interest. I contributed to the conversation as expected, laughed at the right moments, refilled wine glasses, complimented the food. All the while, I maintained a hyper-awareness of Douglas's presence across the table. The timbre of his voice, the elegant movement of his hands as he spoke, the occasional glances we exchanged that lasted a fraction too long. "Mom's been amazing with all the wedding planning," Jessica said as Nathan served dessert, a chocolate mousse that Douglas had brought from a renowned patisserie. "And Douglas has been so helpful, too. They've practically planned this whole wedding together while Dad and I focused on work." She clearly meant it as a light-hearted observation, but I felt a chill run through me at the potential implications. I glanced quickly at Richard, but he merely nodded absently, his attention already shifting back to his phone beneath the table. Douglas, however, seemed to sense the dangerous territory. "Eleanor has done the lion's share," he said smoothly. "I've just offered an opinion here and there when asked. Nathan tells me you've been incredibly generous with the financial arrangements, Richard. The Wellington isn't an inexpensive venue." Richard looked up, pleased by the acknowledgement of his contribution. "Happy to do it. First weddings only come once, hopefully." He laughed at his own joke, oblivious to the slight wince from Nathan, whose parents' divorce history made the comment less humorous than Richard intended. Douglas gracefully redirected the conversation, and soon the moment had passed. Yet as the evening continued, I noticed Jessica watching me with an increasingly puzzled expression, her gaze moving between Douglas and me with growing frequency. After dessert, as I helped her clear plates in the kitchen while the men discussed Scotch preferences in the living room, she finally spoke what was clearly on her mind. "Mom," she said quietly, setting down a stack of dessert plates with deliberate care, "is something going on with you and Douglas?" The question, though asked gently, hit me with physical force. I turned to the sink, ostensibly to rinse a plate, but actually to hide my expression while I composed myself. "What do you mean?" I asked, aiming for casual confusion, but hearing the slight tremor in my voice. "I don't know exactly," Jessica replied, coming to stand beside me. "Just the way you look at each other, how you seem to have these private jokes or references. There's this energy between you." I set down the plate carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady. "Jessica, Douglas and I have become friends through the wedding planning. We have some shared interests, literature, art, that's all." Her eyes, so like mine, observant and perceptive, studied my face. "Are you sure that's all it is, Mom?" The direct question, asked with such gentle concern, nearly broke my composure. For a wild moment, I considered confessing everything, the awakening feelings, the profound connection, the sense of possibilities I'd thought long past. But the thought of burdening my daughter with this knowledge, especially so close to her wedding, was unthinkable. "Of course that's all," I assured her, managing a smile I hoped appeared more convincing than it felt. "What else could it be? I'm 66 years old and have been married to your father for 40 years. She held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Okay, I worry about you sometimes, Mom. You've always put everyone else first. Dad, me, your students. I sometimes wonder if you've ever truly done anything just for yourself." The observation, so innocently made yet so devastatingly accurate, struck a chord so deep I felt momentarily unable to breathe. "That's what mothers do, sweetheart," I finally managed, the platitude sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Maybe," Jessica replied, reaching for more plates. "But you're not just a mother. You're a person, too." We returned to the living room with coffee, the conversation having shifted to Nathan's parents' divorce when he was 12, a subject that made me acutely uncomfortable given my own emotional state. "It was actually quite civil," Douglas was explaining to Richard. "Catherine and I realized we had grown in different directions, wanted different things. We managed to remain friends and co-parents which I think made it easier on Nathan. Still, Richard said with the certainty of someone who had never questioned his life choices, marriage is a commitment. In my day, people worked through their differences rather than calling it quits. I saw Douglas's jaw tighten slightly, though his voice remained even. Sometimes the kindest thing for everyone is to acknowledge when a relationship has run its course, Richard. Staying together out of habit or obligation can be its own form of dishonesty. Our eyes met briefly across the room, the implications of his words hanging in the air between us like an unspoken question. The evening ended soon after, with promises to finalize wedding details over the coming weeks. As we said our goodbyes at the door, Douglas clasped my hand briefly, the contact hidden from others by our bodies. "Until next time, Eleanor," he said softly, the familiar phrase carrying a weight of meaning only I could understand. In the car on the way home, Richard was unusually quiet. Finally, as we neared our neighborhood, he spoke. "You and Douglas Parker seem to have developed quite a rapport." My heart stuttered. "We've worked together on wedding details," I replied carefully, keeping my eyes on the road. He murmured, and for a terrifying moment I thought he might pursue the subject. Instead, he merely added, "Bit of an intellectual type, isn't he? All that talk about architecture and literature." "He's well read," I said neutrally. "Well, I'm glad you've had help with the wedding planning. Makes things easier, I suppose." And that was it, the extent of his observation, his curiosity. He had noticed something, but dismissed it as inconsequential, unable or unwilling to see the truth that had been, however briefly, exposed. As we pulled into our driveway, I wondered if Richard's blindness to my emotional state was a blessing or the most damning evidence yet of how far apart we had grown. The week between Christmas and New Year's Eve unfolded in a whirlwind of wedding preparations, family obligations, and heightened emotions. Jessica and Nathan's wedding was set for December 31st, a symbolic beginning to a new chapter of their lives that felt increasingly, uncomfortably parallel to the new chapter I found myself contemplating in my own. Richard and I hosted Christmas dinner for my sister and her family, maintaining the traditions we had established decades ago. I went through the motions with practiced ease, cooking the prime rib exactly as my mother had taught me, setting the table with the spode Christmas china we received as wedding gifts 40 years earlier, playing the same holiday albums that had provided soundtrack to countless family gatherings. From the outside, it would have looked perfect, a scene worthy of a holiday greeting card. Yet I moved through it all with a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a play where I performed the role of Eleanor Wilson, devoted wife and mother, while the real me stood somewhere in the wings, observing. Richard played his part as well, carving the meat with precision, pouring wine with generous hospitality, engaging in the expected pleasantries about market forecasts for the coming year, and Michael's latest legal triumph in Washington. The day after Christmas, as Richard departed for his annual golf trip to Florida with college friends, a tradition I had long ago stopped questioning or resenting, I received a text from Douglas. "I'm in Boston early for the wedding. Could we meet? There's something I need to discuss with you in person." The formality of the message, so different from our usual warm exchanges, sent a tremor of anxiety through me. Still, I replied almost immediately, "Of course. When and where?" We arranged to meet at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a place I had always loved for its intimate rooms and thoughtful curation. The winter afternoon was cold but bright, sunlight streaming through the courtyard windows as I spotted Douglas waiting by the entrance, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. "Eleanor," he said as I approached, his smile warming his serious expression. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, studying his face for clues to his mood. "Is everything all right? Your message seemed formal." "Let's walk inside," he suggested, guiding me toward the entrance with a light touch at my elbow. "It's too cold to talk out here." We moved through the museum slowly, speaking of inconsequential things at first. The beautiful architecture, the distinctive hanging of the artwork, the fascinating history of Isabella herself. Yet I sensed an underlying tension in Douglas, a careful distance he was maintaining, despite the warmth in his eyes. Finally, in the quiet of the Dutch room, surrounded by Rembrandts and Vermeers, he turned to face me fully. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over the Christmas break," he began, his voice low to avoid disturbing other visitors. "About us, about what's been developing between us." My heart quickened. And I've realized I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor." The simple declaration, spoken so quietly yet with such certainty, seemed to hang in the air between us like a tangible thing. Which is both wonderful and terrible, given the circumstances. I couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the emotions his words evoked. Joy, fear, guilt, longing, all tangled together in an impossible knot. "You don't need to respond," he continued gently. "I'm not expecting a declaration in return. I simply needed you to know where I stand before we move forward in any direction." "I feel the same," I finally managed, the admission both frightening and liberating, though I've been trying very hard not to. His smile held both happiness and sadness. "I know, and that brings me to what I needed to discuss with you." He guided me to a bench where we could sit, positioned as if admiring Rembrandt's self-portrait, age 23, though neither of us was truly seeing the painting. "I won't be the man who destroys a 40-year marriage, Eleanor. I can't be that person. And I refuse to put you in a position where you're living a double life, lying to Richard and your family, compromising the principles that make you who you are." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "Are you saying goodbye?" "No," he said quickly, his hand finding mine briefly on the bench between us. "I'm saying I think you need to make a decision about what you truly want. Not for me, not for Richard, not for Jessica or anyone else. For yourself." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if what's between us is real, and I believe it is, then perhaps you need to have an honest conversation with Richard about the state of your marriage, regardless of what happens between you and me." The suggestion hit me with almost physical force. In all my swirling thoughts and emotions over the past weeks, I had constructed various scenarios, continuing the secret connection with Douglas, gradually pulling away from him to recommit to my marriage, even occasionally indulging in fantasies of a different life entirely. But I had not seriously considered the prospect of actually confronting Richard with the truth of our relationship's emptiness. "I can't possibly have that conversation days before Jessica's wedding," I said, seizing on the most immediate practical obstacle. "Of course not," Douglas agreed. "I'm not suggesting immediate action, just consideration of what your life could be if you were truly honest, with Richard, with yourself." "And if I were honest with Richard?" "What then?" I challenged, a hint of anger surfacing. "Are you suggesting you and I could have some kind of future at our age?" His expression remained steady. "I'm suggesting that at 66, you still deserve happiness, fulfillment, love, whether that ultimately includes me or not." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of his words settling around us. In the adjacent courtyard, winter light streamed through the glass ceiling, creating patterns on the stone floor that shifted with passing clouds. "I've been thinking about something Jessica said," I finally spoke, "at that dinner before Christmas. She mentioned that I've always put everyone else first, Richard, her, my students. She wondered if I'd ever done anything truly for myself." Douglas nodded, encouraging me to continue. "The thing is, she's right. I've spent my entire adult life being what others needed me to be. Supportive wife, nurturing mother, dedicated professor. Even my academic focus was chosen partly for its safety, its acceptability. Somewhere along the way, I lost track of who Eleanor is apart from all those roles." "And who is Eleanor when she's just herself?" Douglas asked softly. I smiled ruefully. "I'm not entirely sure anymore, but I think she's someone who loves poetry more than prose, who prefers Bergman films to Hollywood blockbusters, who once dreamed of spending a year in Paris writing about obscure female modernists. She's someone who values intellectual connection as much as physical attraction, someone who still has desires ambitions, capacity for joy that she had almost forgotten existed. "She sounds remarkable," Douglas said, his eyes warm with understanding. "I'd like to know her better." The simple statement, offered without pressure or expectation, touched me deeply. "I think I would too," I admitted. "Know her better, I mean." We continued our walk through the museum, our conversation shifting to safer topics as we moved among other visitors. Yet something fundamental had changed, not just between Douglas and me, but within myself. A door had been opened that I wasn't sure I could close again, even if I wanted to. "When do you return to New York after the wedding?" I asked as we prepared to leave. "January 3rd, I have a client meeting on the 4th. I nodded, making a decision. "Richard will be at a financial conference in Chicago until the 5th. Perhaps we could have dinner on the 2nd? I'd like to continue our conversation." His eyes held mine, understanding the significance of the timing. "I'd like that very much." As we parted outside the museum, he took my hand briefly, the contact brief but meaningful. "Whatever you decide, Eleanor, know that meeting you has been a gift I never expected at this stage of life." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations. Jessica was radiant with happiness, and even Richard seemed to catch some of the excitement, making a genuine effort to be present for the rehearsal dinner and related festivities. Douglas and I maintained a careful distance, our interaction limited to necessary wedding-related matters, though occasional glances conveyed the deeper current running beneath the surface. The wedding itself was beautiful. The Wellington Hotel's rooftop garden transformed into a winter wonderland with thousands of white lights, crystal decorations catching and refracting the glow, heat lamps providing warmth against the December chill. Jessica was stunning in a classic gown of ivory silk, Nathan handsome and visibly moved as she walked down the aisle on Richard's arm. As mother of the bride, I sat in the front row, acutely aware of Douglas seated directly across the aisle in the corresponding place of honor as father of the groom. When the officiant spoke of love, commitment, and the courage to choose a life together, our eyes met briefly, a wordless communication laden with meaning. At the reception, I danced with Richard perfunctorily, then with my new son-in-law with genuine affection. When tradition called for the mothers and fathers of the bride and groom to exchange dances, I found myself in Douglas's arms, his hand warm at my waist, his eyes holding mine as we moved across the floor. "Happy New Year, Eleanor," he said softly as midnight approached and the wedding guests gathered for the countdown. "May it bring you clarity and joy." "Happy New Year, Douglas," I replied, aware of Richard nearby, champagne in hand, his attention on the large clock projected on one wall. As the countdown reached 0 and cheers erupted around us, as Jessica and Nathan shared their midnight kiss and couples throughout the ballroom embraced, Richard leaned over to kiss my cheek, a perfunctory gesture performed out of habit rather than passion. Over his shoulder, I caught Douglas's gaze across the room, and in that moment, with the symbolic dawn of a new year breaking around us, I knew with sudden clarity what my next steps needed to be. January 2nd arrived cold and clear, a pristine winter day that seemed to mirror the clarity I had been gradually discovering within myself. After seeing Jessica and Nathan off on their honeymoon the previous day, a 2-week escape to the Maldives, and watching Richard depart for his Chicago conference with his usual distracted farewell, I found myself alone in our house with a strange sense of both freedom and trepidation. The day stretched before me, hours to fill before my evening dinner with Douglas. I moved through the quiet rooms, seeing them with new eyes, the carefully curated artwork that Richard and I had collected over decades, the bookshelves filled with volumes that charted my intellectual journey, the photographs documenting family milestones. Every object told a story, represented a choice, embodied some aspect of the life we had built. In my study, I found myself drawn to a small framed photograph I kept on my desk, a picture taken during my graduate school days at Cornell before I met Richard. In it, a much younger Eleanor stood on the arts quad, autumn leaves swirling around her, laughing at something off camera. I remembered that day vaguely, a crisp October afternoon when possibilities had seemed endless, when my future stretched before me like an unwritten novel, full of potential plot twists and character developments I couldn't yet imagine. What would that young woman think of the life I had ultimately chosen? Of the compromises I had made, the passions I had set aside, the slow, almost imperceptible narrowing of my world to fit within the boundaries of a comfortable but emotionally barren marriage? I turned away from the photograph, unwilling to face its silent accusation, and prepared for the evening ahead with deliberate care. I chose a deep blue dress I had purchased years ago for a faculty gala but had never worn, Richard having canceled our attendance at the last minute due to a work emergency. My hair, more silver than auburn now, I left loose around my shoulders rather than in my usual practical style. Small rebellions, perhaps, but they felt significant as I studied my reflection in the mirror. The restaurant Douglas had selected was an intimate French bistro in Beacon Hill, far from our usual haunts and unlikely to be frequented by acquaintances from either the university or Richard's corporate circle. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table, rising as I approached. His face lit with appreciation as he took in my appearance, the warmth in his eyes a stark contrast to Richard's habitual distraction. "Eleanor," he said simply, the words somehow conveying far more than my name. "Douglas." I smiled, shedding my coat and accepting the chair he held for me. We ordered wine, a Burgundy he recommended with knowledge born of genuine interest rather than social posturing, and fell into conversation that flowed with the ease that had characterized our connection from the beginning. We spoke of the wedding, both agreeing it had been perfect in every detail, both carefully avoiding mention of the undercurrent that had run between us throughout the event. As our entrees arrived, coq au vin for me, bœuf bourguignon for him, Douglas finally broached the subject we had been circling. "Have you been thinking about our conversation at the Gardner?" he asked, his tone gentle but direct. "I've thought of little else," I admitted. "In fact, I've been doing a great deal of thinking about my life, past, present, and possible futures." His expression remained open, attentive, without pressing for specific conclusions. "And?" I took a sip of wine, gathering courage. "I realized something on New Year's Eve, as midnight approached and a new year began. I realized that for decades, I've been living half a life, going through the motions, fulfilling expectations, convincing myself that comfort and stability were adequate substitutes for joy, for passion, for genuine connection." Douglas nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "That's a profound realization." "It is, and a terrifying one." I set down my glass carefully. "Because once you acknowledge that truth, you can't unacknowledge it. You can't go back to comfortable numbness. You have to either continue living with the conscious awareness of all you're missing, or you have to make changes that might disrupt everything and everyone around you." "And which path are you considering?" he asked. "I'm going to talk to Richard when he returns from Chicago," I said, the decision that had been forming within me for weeks finally crystallizing into words. "Not about you, at least, not initially. About us, about our marriage, about the silence and distance that has grown between us over decades, about whether either of us truly wants to continue as we are for whatever time we have left." Douglas reached across the table to cover my hand with his. "That takes immense courage, Eleanor." "Does it?" I wondered aloud. "Or is it simply self-preservation at this point? I'm 66 years old, Douglas. If not now, when would I choose to live authentically? How many more years of quiet desperation am I willing to endure? Whatever the motivation, it remains a brave choice," he insisted gently. "A necessary one, I think." I turned my hand to clasp his briefly, before we both withdrew, conscious of being in a public place. I have no illusions about how difficult the conversation will be. Richard and I have built an entire structure of mutual avoidance over 40 years. Breaking through that will require dismantling defenses neither of us may be fully aware we've constructed. "And what outcome are you hoping for?" His question was careful, neutral. I considered before answering. "Honestly? I don't know. Perhaps some miracle of renewed connection, of mutual recognition of what's been lost, and commitment to rebuilding. Perhaps an amicable acknowledgement that we've grown too far apart and would both be better served by separation. Perhaps angry denial and resistance to any change. I paused. But regardless of Richard's response, I know I can't continue pretending. That itself is a kind of victory, I think. It is, Douglas agreed. A significant one. And what about you? I asked, shifting the focus from my situation to his position in this complicated equation. Where do you see yourself in all this? His expression grew thoughtful. I see myself as someone who has been fortunate enough to encounter a remarkable woman at this late stage of life. Someone who would very much like to explore what might develop between us, but who also respects that your journey is your own, with no obligation to include me in whatever comes next. The response, honest, respectful, without pressure or demand, reinforced everything that had drawn me to this man over the past months. Here was someone who saw me fully, who valued my autonomy, who understood that genuine love requires freedom rather than obligation. I would like you to be part of whatever comes next, I said softly. But I need to address my marriage first, to approach that conversation with integrity, not as someone who's already emotionally committed elsewhere. I understand completely, he assured me, and I'll be here, whatever you decide, however long it takes. We finished our dinner, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Books we'd recently read, an architecture exhibit coming to the MFA, memories of our respective childhoods. Yet underneath the pleasant exchange ran a current of deeper understanding, of shared recognition that we stood at a threshold neither of us had expected to encounter at this stage of life. As we prepared to leave, collecting coats and settling the bill, Douglas asked, "When does Richard return?" "Friday evening. Would you let me know after you've spoken with him? Not details, just that you're all right?" I nodded, touched by his concern. "I will." Outside the restaurant, snow had begun to fall softly, dusting the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill with delicate white. Douglas hailed a taxi for me, opening the door but pausing before I entered. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you has awakened something in me I thought was gone forever. The capacity to feel deeply, to imagine new beginnings, to see the world with fresh appreciation. For that alone, I am grateful." "I feel the same," I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion rising within me. "You've helped me remember who I am beneath all the roles I've played for so long. Whatever comes next, I'll carry that gift with me always." For a brief moment, sheltered from view by the open taxi door and falling snow, he leaned forward and kissed me. Not the cautious, questioning kiss we had shared at the engagement party, but something deeper, an affirmation of possibility, of connection, of hope. "Until next time," he said as I settled into the taxi. "Until next time," I echoed, the phrase no longer a simple farewell, but a promise, an act of faith in a future neither of us could yet define. As the taxi pulled away, carrying me back to the home I had shared with Richard for 30 years, I felt neither guilt nor anxiety, but rather a profound sense of rightness, as if after decades of drifting gradually off course, I was finally correcting my navigation, setting sail toward waters unknown, but somehow calling me home. I had no illusions about the difficulty of what lay ahead. The conversation with Richard would be painful, possibly devastating for both of us. The reactions of Jessica, of friends, of colleagues, would range from supportive to judgmental. The practical complications of potentially unwinding a 40-year marriage would be considerable. Yet as I watched the familiar streets of Boston pass by, transformed by gently falling snow into something new and beautiful, I knew with certainty that at 66 I was not too old for courage, for honesty, for beginning again. The years ahead, however many I might have, deserved to be lived fully, authentically, with heart engaged as well as mind. Douglas had been right that day at the museum. I deserved happiness, fulfillment, love, not as rewards to be earned through decades of compromise and self-denial, but as the natural birthright of a human being at any age. The awakening he had catalyzed in me went beyond romantic feelings for one particular man. It was an awakening to my own worth, my own right to choose the shape of my remaining years. As the taxi approached my neighborhood, I felt a curious lightness despite the gravity of decisions ahead. The Eleanor who would step from this vehicle was not the same woman who had entered it 66 years ago, or 40 years ago, or even 6 months ago. She was, at last, simply herself, complex, imperfect, still discovering, still becoming. And in that becoming, whatever form it ultimately took, I had finally found the courage to claim my own life.